Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at the state of the current game of Star Wars: The Old Republic in PvP. First off, we're going to be taking a look at some of the good things that have kind of come out of PvP, and then we're going to be taking a look at some bad things, and then kind of some changes that I think we need to have. The first part, when we get to the good part of PvP, probably the best part I can say right now is the combat is engaging. So the combat in the Star Wars: The Old Republic, it feels alive. It feels like you're actually hitting things. And so that's definitely a good part. There's good player feedback as far as PvP goes. The next kind of thing that I want to look at on positives is it's fun to play. In general, the actual core game itself is pretty good. Everything from using abilities to how things work to how interactions work. Most of the maps, not all of them, but most of the maps are pretty good. It's just a couple of little things that aren't, but overall, the overall experience, if you just break it down from a PvP perspective, just the overall game experience, is actually pretty good. And as we kind of move on a little bit farther, the next really good thing about it is the game, it really does feel like a Star Wars game. At the end of the day, that's one of the biggest reasons why most people are playing. The game really does give you that Star Wars fantasy. If it wasn't a Star Wars MMO, I think it would be doing a lot worse. The IP really carries it sometimes, just from the cosmetics, to the sabers, to the sounds, to just everything that kind of happens in PvP. It just feels like it fits in very well with the Star Wars universe. Something BioWare in the past has been really good about is just world building, and I think the world building and the general way that this MMO feels, it really does feel like it fits in pretty good with the Star Wars lore and everything. Next on our list, we're going to take a look at the core game mechanics. So the core game mechanics in the game, regardless if they work or not, are actually pretty good. There's actually some pretty clever things there. The way that the specs play, the way that everything flows. Yeah, there's some minor exceptions here and there with how they work, where some of them aren't as good, but overall, they're actually all pretty fun to play. The tacticals bring a lot. Yeah, some of them are unbalanced, but in general, it was a good choice. The legendaries, good choice there for everything. So overall, the actual core gameplay is pretty solid for an MMO. It is probably the best MMO combat, is just if you just look at it core game mechanic wise. A lot of other MMOs have very bad game mechanics. This one pretty much, when it works, it does a pretty good job of it. And then moving on to the next part, this is kind of some things that are just flat out bad right now. Whether it be just something that is built up over the couple years or new changes that we've seen in the patches. The first thing that really comes to mind to me is when we talk about things that are bad right now is just the overall game balance. We have certain classes and specs that are just flat out better at doing what they do. The biggest kind of example I can give to you is Carnage versus Fury. Fury just does everything better than Carnage. Fury can run a tactical that basically makes it untargetable. Has its double cloak tactical where Carnage really can't get by with that and keep its DPS. That's kind of one of the biggest things, and there's some other issues like marksman being absolutely just bad. I mean, the marksman spec just doesn't do any damage right now. For a burst spec, it just doesn't do anything. Certain classes are overtuned, op healers, deception sins, so overall the game balance is not in a great place, and I would say that's one of the biggest bad things right now. It kind of pigeonholes you into playing certain things and certain metas, if we look at it with the stealth and everything. Next, going to the next front is the gearing system. The gearing system is just blatantly bad right now. If anyone has ever just jumped into the gearing system after being away for a while, or a new player, it's kind of like you need a PhD to basically find out what gear is what. And the bolster isn't helping either. So for those of you that don't know, bolster is a system in the game where when you enter a PvP zone, it basically evens out your stats so that you're not at a disadvantage. The problem is it doesn't really work that well. Currently, right now, it just takes an average gear rating. So you can run 340 gear, but as long as you run lower implants and relics, you can get to the 328 gear. So that's the max gear cap in PvP. All your stats basically get bolstered to 328 is what it's supposed to do. But you actually have a pretty big advantage as far as damage and health and everything if you actually go with the 340 gear and lower relics. It's not something that's intended as a game. I don't know if it's a bug or anything like that, but it's just not very good. On top of that, the actual gearing itself is just confusing. I don't think there's many people that even know about the moddable gear. If you really look at it, I would love to see a statistic on how many people actually use that. I can't believe it's very high. Next on the list, we have augments. So gold augments bring a big, well, just augments in general. It isn't just gold augments, bring a problem in PvP. It's basically a pay-to-win system almost, paying for more power than others. If you do not have gold augments in PvP, you will be at a disadvantage, period. And the price of the augments right now being at 2 billion each, that's what I've been seeing in gold for here lately, and next week they could be at 3 billion. I mean, the way that the credits are working right now, it's just they could rise up to just not even just being like traded for hyper crates at this point. Augments are a big problem. Augments are basically paying for power at this point, and there needs to be either PvP exclusive augments that only work in PvP and nowhere else, or we just need to completely get rid of them. The reason why that people like augments is because there are certain stat breakpoints that they can hit and make sure they have enough stats, but at the same point, it's kind of a barrier to entry for newer players. So either my biggest selection is just give out free PvP augments that only work in PvP, that basically have the same stats as the gold augments, and just be done with it. PvP doesn't need to be a place where there needs to be any type of pay to win power. It's a competitive game mode. We don't need anything like that. Next on the list is some type of changes and stuff that I think we really need. Some of these are going to be a little bit controversial, but I'll kind of go into the reasons why I think we need to make these changes. The first changes is matchmaking. If you guys have not played here recently, matchmaking is pretty terrible right now. I'm not sure exactly how the matchmaking works, but from what I can tell, it's really taking players and trying to split them up by how good their hidden MMR is. In the game, everyone has a hidden, basically matchmaking rating that's in a lot of competitive games now, from Overwatch to League of Legends. It's basically your skill rating, or your like Overwatch being in like bronze or gold. You actually behind the scenes have a hidden MMR tier. What happens though is that hidden MMR tier is just trying to balance out the team. So you could have two players that are in gold on one team balanced out by 1 gold and 3 silvers. I mean, that thinks that's a fair match. What's actually going to happen is those 2 gold players are just going to roll. They're just going to roll over the other team. The skill gap is that big of a difference. It really is. The difference between silver and gold is a pretty big delta. And I think the biggest problem is I don't think it has very many, from what I can tell, very many tiers. It's just really 3 tiers. It's just bronze, silver, and gold. I think that's just how the behind the scenes matchmaking works. I can't really confirm that though, but it really feels like it just kind of matches that based on that. And silver players, to be completely frank, they kind of rate silver players in regs with that matchmaking system, and they're just kind of average. So when you put 1 above average player, like a gold, versus 2 above average players and some silvers, it just doesn't work. So the matchmaking definitely needs help. The other part of that is just the compositions of the team. A lot of times you'll see one team get a tank and a healer and the other team not. One team get 3 healers and the other team get 0 heals. I mean, one team get 2 tanks, the other team get 0. Stuff like that. We really need to take a look at class roles and basically have them placed on teams that kind of balance it out, because right now it's just bad. And I don't know any other game that really does that. It's any type of competitive game where you can just play 4 or 5 tanks on one team and then it'll put 4 DPS against them and things like that. It just doesn't make for good gameplay at all. Next on our list, we have something that's going to be a little bit controversial. It's what I like to refer to as team stacking, or pre-maze that people call them. Quite frankly, and this is going to upset some people, and I know the general consensus is that the fix for pre-mades to have more pre-mades, but let's be honest, that's not going to happen. This game is never going to be at a point where we're going to have 8, 10, 16 pre-mades in queue. It's just not a thing. The only way to fix this is the pre-mades need to be separated. If there's a 4-man pre-made and they want to queue together, they should be on separate teams, or they shouldn't be allowed to queue. There should be a maximum of probably 2 at this point, just to make the games more even and more balanced. The only reason that teams are really queuing pre-mades and regs is just to stomp new players. I mean, let's call the cat what it is. I mean, the reason why they're in that pre-made queue is because they don't want to queue with the players that are not as good as they are. It's that simple. They don't want to solo queue, and you see it all the time. They make up an excuse that they say they're playing with their friends, but let's be real. They wouldn't play with somebody who's not very good. I've seen it over and over again. I know how it works. The pre-made stuff, it has to stop. I mean, it's just blatantly bad at this point. You're never going to have the population to have a bunch of different queues, a bunch of different teams in queues, a bunch of different skill brackets. At the end of the day, it needs to go away. I know a lot of people won't be happy about that, but in reality, it's just going to make PvP better. I believe that getting rid of pre-mades will increase the population. There have been many a times when I've seen pre-mades that are pretty much just in the PvP queue. No one wants to queue against them. It's not fun for the pre-made either, just rolling over everybody. Sure, it's fun for the 4 or 5 matches, but after that, it's not fun. So both ways are bad. It just isn't good. And then the last thing I want to talk about as far as what needs to change is really the performance issues. The game has gotten to a point with all the abilities and things that are going through that the performance is just not very good. Lots of desync in the game, lots of ability spam causes it, lots of lag, frame rate drops, just random things happen, random invisible players, ghost GCDs not working properly. There's a bunch of different performance issues, and they really do need to be fixed at this point in time to have any type of a really smooth PvP experience, because new players jump into PvP and they get those kind of bugs, they don't know what's happening. They just think it's just some random bug, yada yada yada, or they think they're doing something wrong, or they just don't frankly understand it. So I would definitely go ahead and fix the performance issues. I know in the last patch, the reason why they nerfed and neutered a bunch of abilities, took some things out, was to help this. It hasn't. Quite frankly, until they get rid of a lot of the movement abilities, a lot of the spam abilities, that's not going to happen. Because we know we're not really going to get a new engine or anything like that. So the performance issues need to be taken from an ability standpoint. They need to really lower down the speed of the game. That would be my suggestion here, is we need to cut all of the speed of pretty much everybody, maybe even in half. I think the game would play a lot better. It would play a lot more like 2.0. And 2.0 was really like the high time for PvP. So I think taking a lot of the abilities away, lowering a lot of the speed outputs, just the base player speed could go down to the base player speed's too quick in my opinion. It's kind of just escalated, especially with the new movement abilities, with desync and everything. The game just can't handle it, so I would definitely go ahead and do that. That's kind of my thoughts on the current state of the game right now. You guys have any opinions or anything, go ahead and put them down in the comments. Make sure to like the video and subscribe, really does kind of help everything. And as always, see ya.